Hey, what's up? I am Michael, and today we're going to be doing Paint With Me Ultramarine Flycatcher. Okay, right here I am taking a light gray. I believe it is warm gray 1 or cold gray 1. I'm not quite sure which one it is, but I'm taking that and just putting some borders in there. And then I'm going in and I'm sketching out my reference photo. I'm just sketching it directly on this paper. I'm not using any type of tracing or anything like that. You can trace it, you can sketch it another way and then trace it on your paper if you want. But this is like a 5 by 8.5 watercolor journal, so it's not really big enough to trace much on. Still, I'm drawing the wood for this. This is it's like a little tree limb coming off of a tiny trunk of a tree, and both of them were broken. So the bird, I looked at him, and to figure out how wide he was, I looked at the trunk of the tree there, and I measured him versus the trunk of the tree. And he was about 1.5 or about 2.5 widths of that tree trunk, if I remember correctly. Here you can see me measuring it with my thumb and eyeing the pencil. And then just laying in the bird. I'm laying in his sides first. I want to get the height where he is the widest and put that in there first. And then I'll go in and sketch him in. Once you get your overall shapes for your bird or your subject in, then you want to go in and sort of sketch in your details. And you want to measure them to make sure that they seem to measure out about the right way. You don't always have to draw something exactly by the photo. Your reference is just a reference. It doesn't mean it has to be photorealistic or proportionally exactly the same. You can change things. That is called artistic license. Here I'm just throwing in his feet, and I believe I changed his feet slightly. I wanted to see them slightly different, and I like to do this a lot when I do birds because I like to see different parts of their feet, and I like to sometimes see their nails so I can try to get the shine and get the highlights and stuff and shadows on their feet. It just makes it look a little bit better. Now, since this is a small book, I had to get pretty close to the top for his head to match his proportions, but it worked out okay anyway. And I sketched in the beak. The beak is rather small in this one, and the eye was almost directly in the center of his head, about midway down the bottom of his eye, about midway down his beak. And I believe here I'm coming back in and trying to fix the markings on the breast a little bit and just add a few more details, or not tracings, but outlines around the detail areas. Here I am going in with a light peach color, and then I'm going over it with white. I actually use some other pencils besides my Faber-Castells in this. This is a Michael's version, the Artist Loft, and I'm using light brown for this. Since this is just in my journal, I don't care if it's my best pencils. I'm going in there with a darker gray, a light gray, and a darker gray. The darker gray is to add the markings, the details of the bark, whereas the lighter gray I was going in to mainly add a little bit of shadowing and the bark color where it may look a little gray. Then I went back with that darker gray again. I'm sorry I don't have the colors for you in this video. I've done this one before I started doing that. Then I'm coming back with another, I believe this is a ochre. And then I'm going over the entire limb with that light brown. And then I believe that dark yellow ochre. I'm trying to get in between his toes, and you always want to try, if his toes are really together close, you're going to have to go in a different direction the rest of it. You want to try to remedy that when you actually go in and add in your water. That will help it blend together. Just try not to make it too dark at those points to where it's so obvious that it's a different part or something. You can add shadow up under there if you feel like you can get it there, but it's not always the best idea. If you can do it with a really sharp point, then go ahead though. There I added some gray to the limb just to add different sections. A lot of this limb, parts of it would have been in the sun, and I was trying to show that. This is that ochre color, the darker ochre that I have, and I'm just going over that again. And then here is the Indian red, going over that. Again, just making a few marks with it. And I think I went over it with the brown, the dark brown that I have, to try to add a little bit more. And then we're going to go back in, and we're actually, I forgot to sketch in the wing, which it's very, very close to his body. It didn't add really any width to it, not enough to bother it, and it turned out looking great the way I put it in anyway. It made it the right width, so that worked out. At this point, I'm going to go in with green and just use various greens to do a background. I believe the background was green in the reference photo. I stayed pretty true to the reference photo in this one, I think. I wanted to have a few darker spots. Of course, in the photo, the background is very out of focus and very soft. So I want it to just have a few colors here and there that sort of looked like the background shapes and all. It was not the exact colors, but it was the colors that I wanted and the colors I have. This one here is like an olive color. The first one was a very yellowish green, a bright green, and then this is a more of a mid green here. It might be my dark green, I'm not sure, but I'm going back now with that olive green, and then I'm going over that with that mid green. We'll just call it mid green. What I'm doing though is I'm blocking in different areas just with blocks of color. I don't always do backgrounds like this. I do a lot like I did with the bridal titmouse, but this one I tried to follow more of the way that it actually looked. I believe that is the darker green there. I'm not sure. And then I'm going back again with some more of that light green. And I'm going to try to tie it all in. Now, when I was laying down color, I did miss a few areas, and I had to go back and put in more around him. But I did sort of mess up on around his beak, and you can see how I fixed it. I sort of put a little texture in once I wet it down, and went back with that texture in there and went back with some more watercolor over top of it to try to smooth it out just a little bit, but that helped me to fix the beak. The part that I forgot to do is right there on his back, the green right around his back. I don't know why I forgot to do that to start with. It just, my eye did not catch it. And starting to lay in more colors together and around the other parts. I really love doing backgrounds like this. Melding the colors together is what I call it. You can see though, you can go right over when it's your watercolor pencil before you've activated. Go ahead and mix it all you want. It will mix into other colors. It will make marbleizations. It will do all kind of stuff. I quite like putting purples and blues and pinks all together, and it makes these amazing backgrounds. So don't be afraid to try different things. At this point, I took a break in the recording, and when I come back in a few minutes, I noticed that I had missed that part of his back. So I went on and I blocked that in as well. And I believe at this point I also go back in and I lay in a few extra colors over different areas. Or at least darken it up. Here I go in and I work on his beak. And I try to define the shape of his beak. Now I am going to go in and actually put a few more tones in his beak to try to match it to what I see in the reference. For his eye, I want to define it to where it's definitely a different color. But I want to start out by having some sort of definition in there so that I can see it. And then I go back in with a purple, and I believe I go in with the blue after black as well. And I put blue on his beak and purple on his beak as well. And then I go back over it again with that black. And what that does is it sort of makes it richer. Now this one here I believe is 151, which is Halo Blue Reddish. It's a dark blue, and it makes the other colors pop. The contrast of that with the other blues really makes certain areas pop. I'm going to go in and work on his feet with different gray colors, different scales of gray or tones. I guess I should be calling them values if I'm doing this correctly. So certain areas I'm going to go back in with darker grays, and then also with black to just try to define a few parts of it. Like here with the black on the nails, mainly the black goes on the nails, and just a slight few other places there. I am going to go back in now and slightly try to better define his claws. What I had done was sharpened the pencil, I believe, and I went back in and tried to define just a few more harder lines with that black. Now I'm going to go in certain areas with the light blue and just lay that in where he is the brightest, in his brightest blue areas. Then I have the blue I'm going to call medium blue. You just need a light, a medium, and a dark. But as you can see, I'm going between the medium and the light and sort of switching them up. And then I'm going in here with the darker blue because I believe that most of his chest was the darker blue. But if you look at it, I'm not laying it down very harshly. I'm more or less just sort of laying in the color on its side a little bit, and I'm not trying to make it too dark. I just want it to be there to where it's got a nice darker blue, but it's not harshly dark, and it's not just bared down on to make that really, really, really dark. At that part, I'm going in with the medium blue and then back over it with the dark blue. And then I believe most of the rest of his face, I think I go in with that medium blue to block that in. Then over certain areas with the darker blue to sort of shade it and have a feathery texture. And don't worry if you want to use the same exact colors once you've wet it, because when you wet it, it will dilute the paint and it will make it a little bit brighter, or not brighter, but lighter. And you can go over it with those same exact colors from those pencils and throw in whatever you want as far as details go, if you don't make it too dark in your initial stages. Now, for his wing, the back part and that lower part, I put in a gray. I believe it was like a medium gray, and I went over it. And then at the bottom, I put more of a darker gray and went over it with the darkest blue I have. And I'm doing the same thing here with his tail that I've done with the bottom of his wing. Just a dark gray, medium to dark gray, and then go over it with that darkest blue that I have. You can see slightly that there's a little bit of a difference in the bottom of his tail where I had changed the length of his tail, but when I go back in to do the details, you can see it a lot differently. Here I am going in, just throwing in some blue specks in his chest and around the white parts. They will show up, but then I'm going to go back in with the lightest gray I have, the one that I sketched it with, and I'm bearing down on this to get it darker. I want to get it to where that is his base color. I would like it to be white, but the problem is if I go over that blue without having that gray there, it will not stop it just that little bit. It will end up being a lot more blue than I want it to be. I did go over the entire area with white though, and you might not realize it, but when you do that with the pencils, if you put the white in with the other colors before you put your water on, it will go in and mix with them and lighten that color up a little bit. I went back there with a darker gray to put a little bit of shadow in. Now I'm opening up my water jar and I am getting my water brush out. Now my water jar is a miniature ball jar, like a ball mason jar, and I think it's a 1/4 of a quart or something like that. It's just a very, very short. It's maybe 1.5 inches to 2 inches tall. I'm going to start by going in on the bird with this one. And you can see I have defined some shapes in there with harsh lines. We'll fix that when we come back with our details. As you can see though, where I have put in the gray, when I put in that gray and that white together with that blue speckle, it allows it to have that blue speckle, but not to mix it all blue all over it. And I'm going to come on back from his chest and work on the tree. I want to do specific areas that are alike. I'm working from light to dark in the values and with the colors. The lighter a color is, I'm going to work on it first until I progress to the darkest area of the tree. The reason I'm doing this is to give his belly time to dry. And I'm going to wet the details as they are, and then sort of let them set for a second if I can, and then go back around and not try my best not to touch them. And that, if you want to do your details all at the same time, that's how you do it. If you want to wait on your details, you can do your details, let the entire thing dry, and then go over all of it again. I just love the look of wood or trees and limbs when you do the watercolor pencils this way. When you go back with the other pencils over top of it, it just makes it look really awesome to me. And here we're going to work on the background. I should have done the background last, either first or last, instead of going in and skipping around different parts and all of this. The tree had dried, so I wanted to see if I could go on and get that background done. The reason I said, though, that I should have done the bird first is that if you do the beak and you mess up, you can actually go over, once the beak is dry, you can go over the edge just slightly with that green and it would have been fine. But where I done the background first with this, it sort of messed me up. You'll see that here when I start using the brush on the bird itself, on his beak. And for this entire painting, I just used a Waterbrush. It's just a very small painting, and everything I felt could be done very easily with that Waterbrush. Now, I do have another brush that I could have used, and I didn't think about it at the time. But I did buy a 1/8 round, or no, a 1/8 flat brush, and I tried it on the next painting I done, but I didn't think to try it on this one. And I think I could have done the beak without messing it up at all on this one. Sometimes your water brush just flows too much water, and it can mess you up. I usually really like that, but for really small details, you kind of want to not have as much water. Now, when I move my water brush off of the camera, what I'm doing is I'm dipping it, I mash it into the bottom of my paint or my water, and I mash it in the bottom of that jar, and then I pull it up and I sort of flick the bristles of it on the lip of that jar, and then I take it to my towel or my rag that I use to dry on, and that will clean it. And with watercolor, that's all you really need to do while you're painting. Here I'm going in, and this is why I waited to do the background, or why I done the background first. This was my plan, was I could go onto the blue, and if I got on the blue and it feathered off of the bird itself, it would just look like feathers going off of the bird. So I should have probably done his beak first and then done the other stuff the way that I did. And again, what I'm doing is I'm working with colors from lightest to darkest. So I do that light blue, then the medium blue, and then the dark blue. And there I done the dark blue in that one area, and then I'm coming back here doing the dark blue, but I'll go back and do the medium blue. You should really always do it, like I said, though, from light to dark when you're working with a water brush. That way you can actually go straight into it without having to clean your brush a whole lot. Where I had done the dark parts here, you'll see I'm going to have to clean my brush again before I go back up to that medium color. And now working on his tail, you'll see here where I go down, when I get his tail there, you can sort of see a little area where it looks blocked off. And I don't know if that's where I sketched it out or what it was, but we'll go back in and fix that later. And as you can see there, I done the medium at that point. Now I'm going to work on his feet. Again, with the feet, even, you want to try to go from lightest to darkest if you can. You don't want to just slosh your water on there or on your detailed spots to where it mixes everything together. Yes, that's fine to do for your background, but usually you don't want to do that for your detailed spots. You see me pulling on the tip, and what I was doing was actually forming it back rounder because it had flattened out a little. Now, so I got his beak down, and I'm working on his eye here. And I'm not sure if this is where I done his beak wrong or if it was with the colored pencil instead. But I do go back and fix that. I do know that. I believe that the watercolor part is really done at this point. Mainly done, besides what I fix. I'm going in with the white Prismacolor over the light parts and over some other areas, and I'm trying out different whites that I have. That was the Color, and then this is the Faber-Castell one. I'm just trying them out to see what works best, and honestly, just use a white Prismacolor. Sharpen it and use it if you need to. I like to have one sharp, and I will take another one. It doesn't matter if it's dull or not. I like to have one that is kind of dull, though, because I put in my highlights with that. But I go through the entire chest area, all of the white area on him here, with this white Prismacolor to add in little bits of white. And what that'll do, if you look at it very closely, you will actually see that it has tiny little white parts that mixes with some of the others. It does add a few highlights here and there to it. And then I'm going in and adding in a few more highlights with that white Prismacolor. White Prismacolors will really, really lighten up an area on pretty much any type of color pencil project you do, from my experience. So I love white Prismacolors. Okay, now I am going to come in with the color to go in and actually try to feather him up and put details in. I'm going to start with the light blue. Remember what I said, even if you use the same color as a watercolor, if you go back over it with a color pencil and you do the pencil straight up and down, or you do more pressure on it, you will end up with a darker color over top of your watercolor. Here I'm going through around the edges with different blues. I believe this is the darker one, and I am feathering out the edges a little bit and adding a feathered texture in there. Even though this is the darker one, I am going over that light, that medium blue, and you can still see it through what I put in there. And when I get to the darker one, I am pressing down harder to make it even darker. And as you can see around those edges, though, I'm definitely going through and feathering it out. I don't want it to look blocked off. I want it to be feathered out. I added a little bit of the white there to feather up into it there, because when I looked at the reference, I noticed that it actually feathered into it in that one spot. And it worked just perfect putting that white Prismacolor on it. And again, I'm going over this medium blue area with the darker blue as well. That might have been a dark blue to start with. I'm not sure. And I'm pretty much going over the entire blue area here with that darker blue just to feather it and give it that feather texture. And for those parts, I'm actually just blocking in the entire thing as dark as I can. If you're wondering, the tape on the sides of the picture, it is to go in and hold that down flat. Where I had wet the paper, it had buckled on me a little bit. Now this is a even darker blue. It's a very, very dark blue, and it's from the Color set. I don't know how good these pencils are, to be honest with you. I'm just trying them out. I got them for Christmas and I'm trying them out. But when I put that over those parts, it really smoothed it out. It made it darker, exactly like I want it. And I thought that it made certain areas just amazing looking compared to what they were. As you can see here, I'm going over these other parts, certain areas of it with the even darker blue there, and it really makes those areas pop. And I was not able to do that with the other pencils I had until I got that darker blue. So that darker blue, the dark blue, is something that you should probably try to find. It really seemed to help. Again, I'm going in with the black. If you look at his beak, you can look at it and there's a little spot on top of it, and it was driving me nuts. It comes off the top of it, just like a little line that accidentally come off the top, and I could not stand it. Again, going in certain areas with that darkest blue that I have there, and just feathering it out and adding a little bit more texture and shaded areas, and just general value differences and color changes. And again, I'm going to feather out a little bit. In his chest here, I'm going to do some cross hatching. And the reason for this is if you look at the reference photo, his feathers looked cross hatched there. And I said, I'm going to try it. And it worked for that area. If I had to go back and do it again, I would have done the same thing in that area. But this area over here, I wouldn't have done as much in. Some of that I'm adding in because like where the gray there is, it's just to add in a bit of shading. And in the end, it worked out great for what I wanted. It sort of adds contour, and that's what I meant for it to do. Is you'll see I sort of slightly go up with it a little bit there, and it does add a little bit of contour to him. And I'm going to go in with that, with the different whites, and just try to lighten up a few of the areas as well that I put in. It was sort of bugging me. They looked a little too dark, but then again, I was like, okay, well, you know what? It looks fine. It looks great the way it is. So I think it worked out perfect the way that I've done it. And I'm going in with the black. If you notice, I'm actually extending his talons or his claws, his nails, whatever you want to call them. I extended them just a little bit. The poor thing is missing one of his toes in the reference, so I somewhat added a short toe. It would be on his left foot, the one on the right to you, the furthest one to the right. So, and then I'm going in with in certain areas, there are a little bit of darker spots, and there's just a tad bit of color here and there that I didn't have in there. And I said, okay, I'm going to put that color in there slightly. As you can see, that little triangle right over that foot, I don't know why, it showed up really good in that reference, so I had to throw it in there. And now at this point, I'm going to work on his beak. I'm going in that was a little bit of purple in his beak and his eye. This is the black. And what happened there was that my my pencil lead broke, and it put on not only that one on top, but right there on the bottom. That's the one that was driving me nuts. It put this tiny little speck of black going down, and I was just like, no way. So I grabbed the wrong pencil to start with, and I said, okay, well, let me just do this. And then I realized I had grabbed not a watercolor pencil, but a color pencil, and I had put too much texture on the top. But I did work it out on the bottom there, so I grabbed my darker green watercolor pencil. Here I'm trying to, well, I am blending it in just a little bit, and the reason I'm doing that is so I can go over it with a watercolor pencil and then activate that as well, and it helps it blend more. And this is the darker watercolor pencil. You can see how that color almost matches the other one. The other one's a little bit darker, but that one does match it. And I said, you know what? I'll just add an extra little design. So I ended up going back in with the watercolor and stuff, and this turned out to be more of a jade green look when I done it this way, and I really liked it. And I said, okay, so we'll do it that way. But I went on, as you can see here, and I just pulled that color out and across, and I end up going back in, I think, and putting in a little bit more of that color. Now, in between when I lay the water, or when I lay the pencils down and put the water down, I am letting this dry most of the time, or I'll actually stop the video and blow dry it, and then come back in and do some more pencil and stuff like that, and then go back with more water. And as you can see here, that's what I had just done. That part there, that's what made it okay looking to me, was how I sort of put that triangular shape in there. And I really liked the way that turned out. I thought that it was really, really cool. If I had done anything differently, I would have went back where the tree trunk is and actually went straight down the side of that tree trunk, and then come up the top of it about halfway and looped into that. I went on over to the side because I liked that color so much, and I added in a little bit more, and then I tried to slightly feather it out on the edges a little bit there. And I liked the way it looked, and I wanted to add that little shape. A fun fact, triangular shapes in your artwork makes it more interesting to the eye. I did leave the hairdryer in this part just to show that I do use the hairdryer on it. Going on and making sure that my paper is held down tight and flat with that tape. And I'm going to come back in now and finish up my details. I am going over this with a gray to add texture, and to slightly add the gray color, because that part of the tree was actually gray in the reference photo. To me it was. And I'm going over it with a lighter gray to sort of dull that one out and make it more gray looking. I'm going in with my Prismacolor white to lighten up that one area there, because it was really, really white in the reference photo. Really light and white. Then I believe I come back and define some of those little areas there a little bit better, the little cuts on the bark. There were some more highlights over on this side of the tree trunk. And if you're wondering why it's a brown up top and then it goes to the gray, it's because the bark has been cut away from that part of it. Cut or knocked away somehow. It could have been a beaver. It could have been somebody with an axe. But I do come back in here with a browner color, one of the ochres I have, and I come back in with it, and what I do is I'll brown that up so that you can tell that it is brown and it is wood. I define these details a little bit more. And if you really look at that reference, you can see certain parts of it crisscross with those lines, and that's what I was doing, was trying to get those to crisscross. I do come back in and put a slightly harder edge on both sides of it, I believe, just to make it stand out away from that background a little bit on that side. You don't always want to have any type of harsh line on something, but when it's the right color, you can sort of see a harsh line if you look at it in the reference photo or looking at something in real life. You can slightly see a harsh line in certain situations, and to me, I could see that line right there. So just going over the limb and just defining it, laying in texture with different colors, and going in adding a little bit of detail here and there with it as well. This is a gray, and that was a gray I put over the top to start with. And now I'm coming back in with some of the browns and sharpening up, or putting in more colors, richening them up. Is that a word, richening? I might be making a new word, y'all. I go through here and I do add a few more details. This is the dark brown, and it is, I'm just putting it along the bottom here to sort of define that bottom edge and to put a little bit of a shadow there. And I'm doing my little tree texturing technique slightly on it to add in a few little spots here and there. And then I went back down there to that bottom part, and I actually added in knots on the tree, like little bumps on it, to make it look more like an actual limb. And we're going to go over some stuff with some Prismacolor white to add a few highlights, to vary the color of certain things. It might be a highlight, it might just be a lighter value, and I want to make that value just slightly duller or something. For the tree, I think I mostly wanted to do that because it looked better to me when I started putting that white down. Then I go back over it. After I had sort of put that white down, I went back over that area to put in that bark texture on the trunk. And I believe that is it. We're going to sign it. And that's it. I hope y'all have enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next one. Hey, I'm Michael. Thank you for watching my video. If you'd like to know or see more, I have links in the description, and I have more video content over here. See you later.